Joining me now is Dr. Kimberly Marten, political science professor at Barnard College, Columbia University. Dr. Marten, thanks so much for joining me. Dr. Marten, the last time we talked was when the Wagner Group briefly rebelled against the Kremlin. Now we're 2 months later, and the Wagner Group's leader, Prigozhin, died in a plane crash just yesterday. So first, can you tell us how we got to this point?
Well, it wasn't quite a rebellion against the Kremlin. It was a rebellion against the military that Prigozhin led in late June. And he was very careful at the time that he was engaging in the march to Moscow and taking over Rostov-on-Don and so forth, not to ever criticize Putin as an individual. He was criticizing instead the military leadership. But it was very clear, just, in the way that Putin operates, Putin could not possibly allow that kind of a mutiny to go unpunished. And so it's not surprising that at this point, all the indications that we have are that this was a Russian military operation to take out Prigozhin.
And can you tell us about the date of this, of the plane crash? You mentioned that it was symbolic when you and I were talking earlier. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. It was 2 months to the day of when Prigozhin began the mutiny. On June 23rd, the plane was taken down on August 23rd. And it's symbolic that it was an air crash, in part because the airplane meant so much to Prigozhin. He was always flying around to various places to manage his businesses, but also because during the mutiny, Wagner Group forces shot down a number of Russian military helicopters and a Russian military airplane and killed 13 Russian military personnel. And so it was direct payback in that sense as well. And apparently Reuters reported earlier today that U.S. Officials have now indicated that they have at least some indication that it was in fact a Russian airstrike that took out Prigozhin's plane.
So do you think there's any doubt that this was not retaliation from Putin?
I don't think so. As President Biden said, there's nothing big that happens in Russia that Putin's not behind. And it just fits perfectly the pattern of what we know about how Putin takes revenge. There's no way in the world that the Russian military would have taken this kind of action if it does indeed turn out to be a military airstrike without Putin's permission.
I do want to talk about President Biden's reaction and response to this. He said this: "I said I would be careful of what I drink and what I wrote in. I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised." And he said, as you said, there's not much that happens in Russia that Putin's not behind. Do you think this is a productive response, an appropriate response? What do you make of this?
I don't know what else President Biden could have said, right? He's confirming that he doesn't have all the answers, that U.S. intelligence does not yet have all the answers, but this is what it appears to be. I think it was a very measured response.
Another clip that was going viral yesterday that I saw that sparked my attention was CIA Director Bill Burns saying this when discussing Prigozhin: "Putin is someone who generally thinks that revenge is a dish best served cold, and Putin is the ultimate apostle of payback." Do you agree with this?
Yes, and this wasn't really cold. This was lukewarm. So there are other instances where Putin has waited many years to get payback. So this was actually kind of quick for Putin.
Why do you think it was so quick then if he usually waits years? Because that sounds like it's also psychological warfare in itself.
I think this was sending a very strong message that the kind of mutiny that Prigozhin led would not be tolerated, that this kind of questioning of Putin's authority, even if Prigozhin didn't criticize Putin as an individual, he said he was tricked by his security forces. The worst thing that Prigozhin did, in addition to shooting down those airplanes, was to criticize Putin by saying he was taken advantage of by his security advisors, and that he was wrong in terms of his justification for invading Ukraine. So Prigozhin said, as part of the mutiny discussion that he had, that Ukraine didn't need denazification, that Ukraine was not about to attack Russia, and that NATO enlargement wasn't important. And those all went directly against all of the justifications that Putin had for the war. And so it's quite understandable that Putin would not be willing to tolerate that and wanted to send a message and didn't want to wait too long.